Inside a police precinct filled with arrogance and ego, a white officer publicly humiliates an older black janitor in front of younger recruits. But when the janitor finally looks up calm, steady, and unmoved, something deeper flickers behind his eyes, and one small object he carries will soon change everything. "You missed the spot, boy." The words cut through the morning haze of the precinct like a sharp slap. Officer Brad Kinley didn't whisper it. He wanted everyone to hear. Recruits, officers, even the front desk clerk turned their heads. The black janitor, who was scrubbing the tiled floor near the vending machines, paused without looking up. His name tag read Walter. He was in his late 60s, slim and tall, with a spine that stayed straight despite the years. His silence only fueled Brad's grin. The precinct lobby buzzed with low chatter and the smell of burnt coffee. Police posters lined the walls. Fluorescent lights hummed above like mosquitoes. This wasn't just a place of law, it was a theater of hierarchy. End today. Brad Kinley wanted to perform. "You know," Brad said louder, leaning over Walter's shoulder, "in the army, we used to make guys like you clean our boots. You, any good with Polish, Walter?" A few rookie cops chuckled uncomfortably. Some looked down at their clipboards. No one spoke. Walter kept his eyes on the floor. He wrung out the mop slowly, deliberately. The water dripped into the bucket with a rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Brad reached out and nudged the bucket with his boot. Water sloshed over the edge. "Oops," he said with a smirk. "Guess you'll need to start over." Walter stood up slowly. Not aggressive, not defensive. Just upright. His hands, still in cleaning gloves, rested calmly at his sides. For the first time, he turned and looked Brad in the eye, and something in that gaze, not anger, not fear, but something ancient and tired, made Brad take a half step back without realizing it. The room went still. Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered item, a military service medal, deep bronze, edges chipped, the ribbon frayed with age. He didn't say a word, just held it up at chest height. The room stared. Brad blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" he scoffed, voice suddenly thin. "You got that at a pawn shop." Walter looked at the medal, then back at Brad. His voice was calm, like gravel, soaked in wisdom. "Some of us were cleaning up messes long before you ever made them." "Officer," gasps. A whisper ran through the room like a ripple. Brad's jaw clenched. But before he could respond, Captain Morrison stepped into the lobby. He had caught the last line. "What's going on here?" The captain barked. Brad stood straight, brushing invisible dust off his uniform. "Nothing, sir. Just giving our janitor here some motivation." The captain's eyes narrowed. He looked at Walter, then at the medal still clutched in his hand. His face changed. "Where did you get that medal, Mr. Walter?" Morrison asked, voice quieter. Walter looked straight ahead. "I earned it. 3rd Battalion. Operation Gothic Serpent." Someone near the back choked. "That's Black Hawk Down." A recruit whispered. Brad shifted uncomfortably. The grin had vanished from his face. The room was now watching him. Walter tucked the medal back into his pocket. "I'll finish mopping, Captain. Some stains take longer to clean." He turned and walked slowly, mop in hand, toward the far end of the hall. No one laughed. Brad stood, frozen, his face pale. Around him, the same officers who once smirked now avoided his gaze, and for the first time, he wasn't sure who the room respected more, the man with the badge, or the one with the MOP and the medal. Brad slammed his locker shut. The steel door echoed through the locker room like a gunshot. A pair of young officers tying their boots flinched. They didn't say anything, just glanced at each other before hurrying out. He was alone now, just him and his reflection in the mirror above the sink. The same cocky jawline, the same neatly combed blonde hair, but something in his eyes looked different, not confidence, fragility. He splashed water on his face, trying to wash off the humiliation. It wasn't just the janitor's words, it was the silence that followed, the way no one laughed, the way Morrison's tone changed, and that medal. "What the hell is a janitor doing with a Special Forces medal?" he muttered under his breath, but part of him knew the answer. It wasn't just the medal, it was the way Walter carried himself, like he'd seen things, like he'd earned something Brad never could buy with arrogance or bravado. Just then, Detective Lisa Jordan walked in. She was respected, tough, fair, and not someone who played favorites. "You okay?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she opened her locker. "I'm fine," Brad replied, wiping his face with a towel. "Just a little misunderstanding." Lisa chuckled, not unkindly. Misunderstanding, huh? Looked more like a lesson. Brad tensed. Come on, Lisa. You think that guy actually served in Mogadishu? He's a janitor. Lisa closed her locker slowly, eyes still on him. And you think a uniform makes you honorable? Brad blinked. He never talks about it, Lisa continued. But I've heard stories. He lost friends in that mission, got a bullet in his leg. They gave him the medal before he was 30. You know what he did when he got back? Took care of his brother's kids, worked 2 jobs, never once asked for special treatment. She let the silence hang. And the funny thing is, everyone in this building knows who he is. Everyone except you. Brad looked away, his fists clenched, but no words came. Lisa paused at the doorway. Maybe clean your own mess before mocking someone who spent his life cleaning up after others. She left. Brad stood there, alone again, and the silence this time wasn't just awkward, it was loud. Back in the janitor's closet, Walter was rinsing out his mop. His back was to the door when Officer Jeremy, one of the rookies from the lobby, knocked quietly and stepped inside. "Ah, sir," he said nervously. "I just wanted to say, that was the most badass thing I've ever seen." Walter turned slightly, not smiling, but there was a softness in his eyes. "I wasn't trying to be," he said gently. "I know," Jeremy replied. "That's what made it even better." He hesitated, then added, "My cousin served too, Afghanistan. He said guys like you are legends. Said some of the toughest soldiers he met didn't talk loud, they just walked heavy." Walter nodded, once, slowly, then handed Jeremy a clean towel. "You spill it, you clean it," he said with a faint smirk. Jeremy grinned and saluted playfully before walking out, as the door clicked shut. Walter looked at the shelf where his medal rested, beside a folded flag and a framed photo of his unit. His hand lingered on the glass. "Funny how folks forget what doesn't shine loud enough," he murmured. Back in the squad room, Brad sat at his desk, typing half-heartedly. He could feel the stares, the whispers. He glanced at the schedule. Walter's next cleaning round would pass by in 30 minutes. He didn't know what burned more, the shame of being called out, or the knowledge that a man he dismissed as invisible now stood taller than him. In everyone's eyes, the air in the precinct had changed. It wasn't loud, not obvious, but it was there. A shift in how people looked at Walter as he moved down the hall, pushing his mop bucket with slow, deliberate ease. Where before there had been indifference, now there was something else, respect. The rookies who once walked past him without eye contact now nodded. A few even offered a good morning, sir. And though Walter said little, the nod he returned was enough. In the break room, Sergeant Linda Perez sipped her coffee while flipping through an old precinct yearbook. When Officer Kim sat beside her, Linda looked up. "You remember when that flood hit the west side, about 8 years ago?" she asked. Kim nodded. "Sure, we had 4 feet of water in the basement cells." "Yeah, one of the rookies got trapped," Linda said quietly. "You know who pulled him out? Broke a window with his elbow, dragged him out before the water hit his chest." Kim leaned in. "Walter," Linda nodded, "never took credit, just went back to mopping." Kim sat back, stunned. Linda took another sip of coffee. "That man's been saving lives since before some of these kids were born." Elsewhere, Brad Kinley was busy too, but not with praise. He was at a desk with his laptop open, a dozen tabs, pulled up: military databases, news articles, veterans forums. He wanted to find something, anything, that would discredit Walter. A fraud accusation, a record mistake, even a fake ID, but every search hit a dead end. The name Walter J. Davis came up all right, but the records were clean. Honorably discharged, decorated service, multiple commendations, injured in combat, released with distinction, no scandals, no black marks, no lies. Brad clenched his teeth and closed the laptop hard. "Damn it," he muttered. He walked out into the hallway, nearly bumping into Jeremy, the rookie from before. Jeremy held a box of donuts and looked up awkwardly. Hey, Officer Kinley," he mumbled, trying to move past. Brad blocked him. "You think he's a hero now? That janitor?" Jeremy blinked. "He is a hero. Always was." Brad's eyes narrowed. "You think a medal changes anything? That guy cleans floors. You gonna salute him next?" Jeremy hesitated, then did something unexpected. He raised his hand and saluted. Right there, in the hallway, not to mock, not to provoke, but sincerely. "Yeah," Jeremy said, "I just might." Brad's mouth hung open for a second before he shoved past him, walking fast toward the parking lot. Behind them, Walter emerged from a supply closet, quietly observing. He hadn't heard everything, but he saw enough to salute. The posture, the subtle shift in power. Later that day, Walter wheeled his cart into Captain Morrison's office for his usual trash pickup. The captain looked up from his desk. "Walter," he said, "you okay with all this attention?" Walter shrugged. "I've been ignored longer than I'll be remembered. Doesn't bother me." Morrison smiled faintly. "You ever think about coming back? We could use a man like you." Walter shook his head gently. "I fought my battles, Captain. Now I just keep things clean." He emptied the bin, wiped the edge of the desk, and paused. Then he added, almost as a whisper, "But sometimes, you've got to let dirt show before folks remember why cleaning matters." Morrison nodded slowly, thoughtful. Has Walter pushed the cart out. His medal, now pinned discreetly inside the lining of his jacket, caught the light for just a second. Not enough to shine, just enough to whisper. And across the building, people started listening. Brad leaned against the coffee machine, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Walter. Every swish of the mop, every squish of the wheels, felt like a personal insult. He wasn't going to let a janitor, no matter how decorated, steal the attention he thought he deserved. In Brad's mind, Walter hadn't earned respect. He'd manipulated it, staged it, so Brad got to work. He submitted a sanitation request to facilities, assigning Walter to clean the drunk tank cells 3 times a day, instead of once. He quietly told dispatch that Walter's closet needed to be moved next to the boiler room, where the heat made breathing difficult. He even slipped a note onto Walter's cart one morning that read, "You forgot your leash." Walter picked it up, glanced at it, and folded it without a word. But others noticed. In the evidence locker, Officer Tonya Brooks raised an eyebrow after hearing Walter had been sent to disinfect blood from the holding room with no proper gear. "Standard," she muttered to Lisa Jordan. "That wasn't protocol." Lisa didn't reply right away, just clenched her jaw and kept writing her report. Later that afternoon, Lisa quietly walked into Captain Morrison's office. "Brad's trying to make Walter quit," she said flatly. Morrison looked up from his paperwork. "You sure?" "I've seen the paperwork. I've heard the comments. And now he's assigning Walter to clean things that don't even fall under janitorial duties, like the impound lot." The captain sighed. "Damn fool's trying to bury himself." Lisa leaned on the edge of the desk. "Then maybe it's time someone helped him dig." Back in the basement, Walter was mopping near the solitary cells. The cement floor was cold, the smell sharp with bleach and rust, a place people didn't often visit unless something had gone wrong. He was bent over a stubborn stain when he heard footsteps. Brad, double quotes. "Well, look at that," Brad said, smirking. "Back where you belong." Walter didn't look up, just kept scrubbing. Brad crouched down beside him, voice low. "You like all this attention, don't you? Playing the humble hero, while everyone forgets what you really are." Walter paused, slowly wringing out the mop. "And what's that?" he asked. Softly. Brad stood. "A janitor. That's it. No matter what garbage you hang around your neck, you're still the guy cleaning piss off these floors." Silence. Then Walter stood, calm, eyes steady. "And you're the guy who walks across the mess I clean, every day." Brad's lip curled. "You think you're better than me?" Walter leaned in, not aggressive, just quiet enough for the words to hit harder. "No, I think I've seen what better looks like, and it ain't this." Brad shoved him, a hard, angry shove. Walter stumbled back slightly, not hurt, not surprised, just still. Behind them, a camera mounted in the corner blinked silently. Brad followed Walter's gaze, saw the lens, swore under his breath. Walter turned back to his mop and began cleaning again. But the hallway wasn't quiet anymore. Jeremy and another rookie had seen it all from around the corner. No one said a word. They didn't need to. The next morning, Brad found a memo taped to his locker. "Internal conduct investigation pending Captain Morrison." And down the hall, Walter walked with the same quiet dignity. His cart creaked, his hands were steady. But this time, someone had left a fresh cup of coffee on top of it, with a sticky note, "For the one who's always cleaned up our mess, respectfully, Unit B." Walter read it, no smile, just a subtle lift of his eyes toward the ceiling, as if nodding to someone long gone. Because slowly, the precinct wasn't just remembering his past, it was beginning to honor it. The blinds were half drawn in Captain Morrison's office when Walter stepped Inside, sunlight streaked through the slats, casting lines across the carpet and the old oak desk. Morrison didn't stand this time. He just gestured to the chair across from him. "Walter," he said with a sigh, "have a seat." Walter did. They sat in silence for a moment. Two old men in different uniforms, separated by time, by rank, but bound now by the same building, and a widening rift within it. "I owe you an apology," Morrison finally said. Walter's eyes remained steady. "For what?" "For letting it go on so long," Morrison said. "Brad, the snide remarks, the sabotage, all of it. I knew he was rough around the edges, but I didn't know he was this rotten." Walter let the words hang before replying. "Rot doesn't start overnight. It spreads when no one checks it." Morrison nodded slowly, swallowing the truth. He tapped the medal now sitting on his desk, the one Walter had left behind the day before. "You know, this isn't just any commendation. Bronze Star with Valor device, that's combat gallantry." Walter didn't flinch. "I know." Morrison leaned forward, more curious now than commanding. "Why do you never tell anyone? Why keep that hidden all these years?" Walter exhaled, the air heavy. "Because it doesn't clean floors," he said, "and floors still need cleaning." Morrison blinked. Walter continued, eyes distant now, seeing something far from the walls of the precinct. "I came home in '94. The country was tired of war, tired of black heroes. I applied to 10 places. No one called back. Then your precinct needed a janitor. No questions, no forms, just a mop." Morrison's throat tightened. "And you took it." Walter nodded. "I didn't need the world to salute me. I needed to work, feed my family, stay sober. So I stayed quiet, did my job." He looked up, but silence don't mean weakness. Outside the office, Brad sat at his desk, his mood darker than ever. An official complaint had been filed. Lisa Jordan had backed it, Jeremy too. A disciplinary hearing was scheduled. He wasn't fired, not yet, but the leash had tightened. The whispers he once enjoyed were now about him, not from him. Even his so-called friends walked past faster, afraid the smell of his downfall might cling to them. He grabbed his phone and texted a number, saved as internal buddy Feds. "Brad, need a favor. Want to file a security concern about someone working here. Internal buddy, who Brad names Walter J. Davis, janitor, claims military service. Check his discharge." He stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. Then internal buddy, "Dude, that guy's a decorated combat vet. Discharged clean. 2 presidents gave him letters. He should be shaking his hand, not digging dirt." Brad's stomach twisted. Even the system he counted on to protect his pride was siding with Walter. Back in the office, Morrison looked at Walter one last time. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked. "You've got stories this place needs." Walter stood, collected his mop handle, leaned it against the wall like a cane. "I teach," he said, quiet and resolute. "Every day. That's most people don't know they're learning." As he stepped out into the hall, officers parted naturally. Not from pity, from reverence. One nodded. Another offered a small salute. Even Lisa gave him a tight smile. And when Walter returned to his cart, he found a patch pinned to the side, navy blue, silver lettering, "One who served, one who still serves." Walter paused, touched it gently. The captain watched from behind the blinds, and for the first time in a long while, he felt proud of something not written in the books. The morning briefing room was unusually quiet. Chairs scraped against the linoleum floor. The screen flickered with the precinct's daily operations chart, but no one paid attention to the text. Instead, all eyes were darting between 2 men, Walter, mopping in the back corner, and Brad, standing near the whiteboard, arms crossed, jaw set. He wasn't leading the meeting. He had no authority that day. But he stood like he still controlled the room, until Jeremy raised his hand. Captain Morrison paused mid-sentence. "Yes, Officer Brooks." Jeremy cleared his throat. "Requesting a moment to speak, sir. Just 2 minutes." The captain looked at him curiously, then gave a short nod. "Go ahead." Jeremy stepped to the front, visibly nervous but unwavering. He glanced once at Walter in the back, who didn't stop moving, just kept wiping the same clean section of wall, pretending not to notice. "I want to say something," Jeremy began, "about the culture here." The room stiffened. "We're taught to protect and serve. We wear badges that mean something. But lately, I've been learning more from a man with no badge and a mop than from some of the ones with bars on their collar." Now the room was frozen. Brad shifted uncomfortably. Jeremy continued, voice firmer. That man, Walter Davis, served this country in combat, and he's still serving, not just by cleaning up our messes, but by showing us what integrity looks like. A few nods began to ripple in the room. Another rookie, Cassandra, stood up slowly. I second that, she said. Walter helped me when I broke down crying my first week. Didn't say much, just sat next to me and listened. I didn't even know who he was yet. Now it wasn't just the rookies. A senior officer, Sergeant Fields, added. Walter covered my shift one night when my kid was in the hospital. Didn't even ask questions. Just said, family first. The air was thick with memory and meaning. And then, the surprise, Jeremy stepped aside, and the group revealed a small frame wrapped in brown paper. Cassandra tore it off. Inside was a photo of Walter in uniform, young, proud, standing in front of a chopper. Below it was a simple bronze plate, Walter Davis, hero in service. And still serving. They placed it on the wall, right next to the Officers of the Month board. There was a pause, a beat. Then, applause. Not loud, not performative, but real, quiet, earned. Brad stood, speechless. His face had drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but Captain Morrison held up a hand. That's enough. Kinley, the captain said, his voice sharp. You've said more than enough this month. Walter paused his mopping and turned slowly. He looked at the frame, the photo, the title. He didn't smile, didn't bow, didn't cry, just stood straighter, eyes full of something deep, not pride, but acknowledgement, the kind every man deserves, but few ever receive. After the meeting, Jeremy approached him in the hallway. Hope you're not mad, he said, sheepishly. Walter shook his head. I don't get mad easy. Jeremy hesitated. Do you think we overstepped? Walter looked him in the eyes. No, you stepped where it mattered. Across the building. Brad sat in the locker room alone again. He stared at the photo of Walter now appearing on the precinct's internal bulletin board. He clicked it, tried to delete it, access denied. Someone had locked it in place. Captain level authorization. Brad's own reflection glared back at him from the dark screen, and for the first time in his career, he felt small. The precinct buzzed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, radios crackling, boots echoing on tile. But beneath it all ran a silent current of change. Walter had become more than a janitor now. To some, a mentor. To others, a mirror. And to Brad Kinley, a threat. He watched from the hallway as Walter walked past two rookies, Jeremy and Cassandra, both of whom offered respectful nods. Walter returned the gesture with quiet grace, pushing his cart toward the locker rooms. Brad's fingers curled around his clipboard until the paper crumpled. He couldn't take it anymore. He stormed down the hall after Walter, anger burning so hot it clouded his better judgment. He didn't care about the cameras, didn't care who was watching. He needed to remind everyone who the real officer was. He caught up just as Walter reached the cleaning supply door. Hey, Brett barked. You think a few stories make you better than me? Walter stopped, didn't turn around, didn't flinch. I don't think about you at all, he said simply. Brad shoved the cart aside, sending the mop bucket crashing into the wall. Water spilled across the floor. Clean that up, boy. Brad spat. Then, he said it, a word. The word. Rancid, sharp, centuries old. It hung in the air like poison. Everything stopped. Walter slowly turned, eyes locked on Brad, not with fury, but with something worse, call and pity. Behind them, a heavy silence fell. And then, hey, the shout came from down the hall. Jeremy, Cassandra, and two others had heard it. So had Lisa Jordan. They came storming in. What the hell did you just say? Lisa demanded. Brad's face twisted. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. Cassandra cut in, voice trembling. You said exactly what you meant. Jeremy stepped between Brad and Walter, shoulders squared. You crossed a line. Walter, still calm, placed a hand on Jeremy's shoulder. No need, he said softly. I've crossed bigger lines than this man will ever understand. Lisa turned to Brad, furious. You're done. Captain Morrison arrived seconds later, having already seen the incident replay on the hallway camera feed. His face was unreadable, but his voice was ice. Officer Brad Kinley, as of this moment, you are suspended pending internal review for racial misconduct and harassment. Brad blinked. You're seriously? Hand me your badge. The entire hallway stood still as Brad slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge. He held it for a second, then let it drop into the captain's outstretched hand. The clink of metal against palm was louder than a gunshot. Morrison turned to Walter. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davis." Walter nodded. "I'm not," he said softly. "Some dirt don't come off until it's exposed." Brad stormed off, face red, head down. No one followed. No one defended him. In the break room later, Cassandra whispered, "I never thought I'd see a man bury himself with one word." Lisa shook her head. "He didn't bury himself with one word. He built the grave, one smirk, one insult, one shove at a time. Today, he just fell in." Walter, back at his cart, replaced the bucket and mopped the spilled water in silence. Not with anger, not with victory, with dignity, because for him, it was never about revenge. It was about finally being seen. A week passed. No more slurs. No more snide remarks. No more sideways glances. Brad Kinley's locker sat untouched, his nameplate removed. The echo of his absence was louder than his presence had ever been, and something else had changed. The precinct, once rigid and cold, began to breathe. Cassandra now led morning briefings with a focus on respect and teamwork. Jeremy ran a new mentorship initiative for rookies. The sergeants opened up weekly listening sessions for non-uniformed staff, but all of it, quietly, pointed back to Walter. In the captain's office, Morrison stared at a newly printed document. On his desk, Walter Davis, Civilian Liaison and Culture Advisor. It wasn't a fancy title, but it was official. It came with a desk, a badge, a voice. When Walter stepped in to collect the garbage as usual, Morrison held up the document. "You're not here to empty my bin today," the captain said. "You're here because I have an offer." Walter raised an eyebrow. Morrison slid the paper across the desk. "We want you on the team. Officially, you'd help bridge the gap between officers and community staff. Lead ethics workshops. Speak to rookies. Keep this place grounded." Walter glanced down at the document, then back at the captain. "You're asking a janitor to teach police how to be better people." Morrison shook his head. "I'm asking a leader to keep being one." But this time, from the front of the room, Walter didn't say yes. Not then. He simply nodded, took the paper, and left quietly. Like always, down the hall. Jeremy found him near the vending machine. "I heard," Jeremy said, trying to sound casual. "The offer. That's huge." Walter folded the paper in half, tucked it into his back pocket. "I'm not a desk guy." Jeremy grinned. "Maybe not, but you've got more influence than anyone I've ever met." Walter said nothing. Jeremy stepped closer. Sincerity in every word. "You don't have to wear a badge to keep this place clean. But if you sit at that table, maybe fewer people will end up like Brad." Walter looked at the boy. No, the man standing before him. Courage in his voice, not anger. Hope, not fear. "I didn't serve for attention," Walter said quietly. "I served to protect." Jeremy nodded. "Then protect us. Help us be better than the badge." That night, Walter sat at home at the kitchen table. The paper unfolded. Again, his fingers traced the words, not because of what they offered, but because of what they meant. Across the table sat a photo of his brother, long past, a Marine, lost to addiction after discharge. The reason Walter raised his niece and nephew, the reason he stayed sober, the reason he worked 2 jobs without ever complaining. He reached across the table, picked up a pen, signed his name. In the morning, he walked into the precinct, not with a mop, but with purpose. Captain Morrison stood in the lobby as Walter approached. "You're early," Morrison said, smiling. Walter shrugged. "Some stains start before sunrise." He walked past the mop closet without even looking at it, and when he entered the morning briefing room, every officer, rookies and veterans alike, stood, not as a formality, but as a gesture. Walter nodded once. "Let's begin," he said. And, just like that, the man once called invisible became the one everyone followed. The review hearing was closed all quiet and tense. Brad Kinley entered the conference room wearing the same uniform he used to swagger in, but this time, his shoulders sagged, his eyes darted. The badge clipped to his belt was temporary, a placeholder, not a promise. Across from him sat Captain Morrison, Lisa Jordan, Sergeant Fields, and one civilian representative, Walter Davis. Brad didn't know Walter would be there, and when he saw him sitting upright in a pressed shirt, no mop in sight, papers in hand, something flickered behind Brad's eyes. "Fear. Let's begin," Morrison said. The The panel read through the charges: harassment, conduct unbecoming, racial slur directed at a civilian, multiple witness reports, security footage. Brad leaned forward. "I'll say this," he began. "I lost my temper. I admit that. But I've served this precinct for 10 years. Clean record. Maybe I got too comfortable, but I'm not a racist." He turned to Walter. "I've got issues with how people treat uniforms, not with who they are." Walter didn't blink. "You said a word that wasn't about uniforms." Brad's mouth tightened. "It slipped," Lisa Jordan interjected. "It didn't slip, it surfaced." Brad looked around the room. No support, no sympathy. He tried a different angle. "You're really going to ruin my career because of one word?" Walter spoke before anyone else could. "No," he said calmly. "You ruined it one moment at a time. The word was just the nail." Brad's eyes flared. Walter continued. "You mocked me in front of officers, shoved my cart, made me mop blood with no gloves. You wanted me invisible." He leaned in slightly. "But you didn't realize some of us shine even when we're covered in dirt." Silence fell again. And then Morrison spoke. "Officer Kinley, based on the evidence, your conduct is incompatible with this department's values. Effective immediately, your suspension is upgraded to termination." Brad froze. "You can't be serious," he said quietly. Morrison nodded. "I am." Brad stood suddenly, rattled. "I gave a decade to this place." Walter rose too. "And I gave my soul to a country that called me names you wouldn't dare whisper. But I still protected it. Still protect it." Brad looked around, desperate now. No eyes met his. He stormed out of the room. No words, no fight left. The door clicked shut behind him. A soft exhale escaped from Lisa's lips. Then she turned to Walter. "I don't know how you stayed so calm," she said. Walter gave a small smile. "I've survived worse storms than that man's temper." Sergeant Fields chuckled. "Still, that was one hell of a line." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You didn't just defend yourself," he said. "You reminded all of us who we answer to. Not the badge, not the rank, the standard." Walter nodded. "And the standard starts with how you treat the lowest role in the room." After the hearing, Walter walked out into the sunlit courtyard behind the precinct. Jeremy, Cassandra, and 3 other officers stood waiting. "You good?" Jeremy asked. Walter nodded. "I'm always good when truth wins." Cassandra stepped forward and handed him something. It was a nameplate, not for a janitor closet, but for an office door. "Walter Davis, Cultural Integrity Officer." Walter looked at it for a long second. Then, for the first time in this building, he smiled. The real kind. Not polite, not reserved, real, because, for once, he wasn't just tolerated, he was trusted. A week later, the precinct cafeteria was fuller than usual. No birthday balloons, no fake decorations, just plain chairs, honest faces, and a plaque on the wall. "Dignity has no rank." Dedicated to Walter Davis. Walter stood at the front. Clean uniform, fresh shave, medal shining gently against his chest. Cassandra stepped to the podium. "You all know Walter as the quiet man who keeps this place running. But today, we honor what he truly is, a protector, a man of discipline, a survivor of silence." The officers clapped. Some stood. Walter raised his hand modestly, then slowly walked up to speak. He paused before the mic, not because he was nervous, but because he wanted his words to settle. "Like truth always does, I used to believe being invisible was the safest way to be black in a place like this," he began. "But silence is heavy, and one day, it breaks." He looked around. "You all watched a man laugh at me, spit near me, knock my tools down, and you said nothing." That silence was louder than his words. The room grew still. Walter reached up and touched the medal. On his chest. "You've seen this before," he said, "but you never asked where it came from." A young new recruit, Officer Pioneer, raised his hand from the crowd. "Sir, where did it come from?" Walter's eyes softened. "Baghdad, 2003. We were convoying through a town that didn't want us there. One of our Humvees hit an IED. I was second vehicle. They told us to hold back." His voice quieted, "But I didn't." Long breath. "I ran to that truck, pulled out a screaming sergeant with both legs gone, took 2 bullets in my vest. I didn't care. That was my brother, in that fire." He paused. "Turns out, that sergeant I saved, his name was Alan Kinley, Brad's older brother." The room froze. You could feel the collective gasp without hearing it. Walter nodded. "Yeah, The same Kinley who mocked my mop. I saved his family. Stepped back from the mic. Then, he said, don't wait until you see a medal to treat someone with respect. Silence. Then a single clap. Then two. Then the entire room, officers, secretaries, interns, captains, stood and clapped until their hands turned red. Brad. Kinley wasn't there, but the message was. Walter sat down. Officer Pena came over and shook his hand. You're a better man than I'd ever be. Walter looked at him with a quiet strength. I'm not better, he said. I'm just still standing. Later that evening, Walter walked out of the precinct with Jeremy and Cassandra. The sunset lit the sky with fire orange and deep blue. Where to now? Cassandra asked. Walter looked ahead. Home, but not to rest. To write. People forget stories like mine if I don't tell them. Jeremy grinned. You gonna write a book? Walter shrugged. Maybe, or maybe I'll just start with telling the janitor at the school down the street that he matters. They walked off down the sidewalk. No uniform now, just friends. Moving toward something bigger than justice. Something called change. And as Walter turned the corner, the sun caught his medal one last time, and the shine looked a lot like hope.